Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. Well, I'm pretty caffeinated, so I'm ready to tackle another batch of Process My Photo images. I only received 7 overnight, so it's starting to peter out a little bit. I should be caught up in the next day or so. Real quick, I mispronounce names all the time, so if your name is any more complicated than Bill, I'm probably going to mispronounce it. My apologies in advance. Also, if you could, in the description below this video will be a link of how you could help me keep making free photography how-to videos. There's several different ways you could help, and some of them won't even cost you any money. So if you could do me a favor and at least click that link, I would really appreciate it. All right, let's get started with this batch of images. This first image is from Ed Wolf. He says when he saw the image, it screamed black and white to him. He messed around with contrast and colors to make it more dramatic. He did a little local adjustments on the streaks of snow in the foreground and on the beach on the right, and darkened the grass in the foreground. Brought the whites down to no clipping and clipped the blacks a little bit. Very, very well done. Next image is from Paul Jacobs. Paul didn't write what he did to the unit or to the image or what programs he used, but that's his version. It looks pretty cool. This is Michael Durkin. Let's see. He used a bit of texture from Topaz and finished it off in Luminar Flex. And that's a pretty cool rendition of the image. This one is from Steven Schusterman. He's just saying he did a real quick processing on this, and it looks pretty cool. Cropped in a little tighter there. Looks pretty nice. This is Mr. Krister. All done in Lightroom. That's all he wrote. So there's a Lightroom rendition of the image. This one is Lou Rumford. Let's see. He used Lightroom CC. He adjusted whites, blacks, shadows, all the tone adjustments, used a radial mask to lighten the center, while 2 gradient masks from the top and bottom did the opposite. That's pretty interesting. Adjusted the color of each mask slightly differently. Made the top more blue and the bottom warmer. Lightened some water and highlights with a brush. He sharpened the image almost a full mask to just hit the big edges and catch some of the foreground grass. And then he lightened the closest post, which I think is this one on the far right. Blurred the edges of the image and some of the water with a brush and cropped the image slightly and used a vignette. It's pretty cool. This is from Don Ho Depp. Let's see, bear with me. He used Lightroom's auto to start out, so he did the auto tone adjustments with the image. After that, he kicked up the exposure a little bit. Let's see, he used the brush to add some character on the posts. Brought up saturation a bit and luminance more on the grasses. To add contrast, I lowered the luminance on the clouds. The top and left side didn't do much for me, so I cropped them out. And I feel the new crop added more depth to the image, and I can't argue with that. Very, very cool rendition. This one is by Patrick J. Boning. Let's see. No, he didn't really write what he did to it, but that's pretty cool. This is from Adrienne Allen. Cropped to make the trio post the subject, so you can see how he cropped out that post on the far right. Altered exposure in Camera Raw, enhanced color with Tone Curve and HSL in Camera Raw. He dodged the post. For those of you that don't know what that means he used a brush to make the post lighter. A dodge tool in Lightroom will make things lighter. Added vignette to draw the eye to the center, and a high pass filter at 0.9 radius with linear light blend mode. Very cool. This is from Gary Hunt. Let's see. Started with Affinity Photo, created a luminosity mask for the sky by taking the blue channel and using the level adjustment to mattify the sky. From there, he went over to On1 Photo Raw and made further adjustments by adding a few filters. That's it. That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. We got a few from Affinity Photo. That's interesting. Let's see. This is from Jack Coyne, processed in Elements 12, and then he applied the Fractalis plugin. I'm not familiar with the Fractalis plugin. Fractalius Fractalius plugin. This is Kate Jones. Let's see. Initial cropped it very slightly and made a few basic adjustments in the develop module. In effects, oh, by the way, they used On1 Photo Raw 2019. So they cropped it, made some adjustments in the develop module of On1 Photo Raw 2019. In effects, used the color enhancer to adjust the blues and magenta, applied some dynamic contrast and a little glow. Finally added a strong vignette and added localized sunshine. That's pretty cool. This is from John Friend. Says, process it as he does all his photos. That's Lightroom and Photoshop. Lightroom, then Photoshop is what he wrote. This is from Roman Fetus. Let's see. Processed in Photoshop using luminosity masking, using channels, curves, and levels, dodge and burn selective areas, and unsharpened mask. So that's pretty cool. See, we get some high-key images, some low-key images, and everything in between. Pretty cool. This is from Eileen Sokol. Let's see. Bear with me, I'm sorry. First use Luminar Flex for the Accent AI filter and the AI Sky Enhancer and Golden Hours filters. Then they masked the golden hour filter, I guess, just so it would be applied to specific parts of the image. Next, used Topaz Studio. And in Topaz Studio, they used AI Clear, Precision Contrast, Precision Detail, Tone Curve, Dual Tone with a mask, and Vignette and Sharpen with a mask. So that's a pretty cool rendition. This is from Bruce Tennant. In Lightroom, he did the tone adjustments, whites to +38, blacks to -45. Added quite a bit of dehaze, +31, and turned clarity down to -12 to get rid of the too clear effect. That's kind of interesting. That's an unusual adjustment. Dehaze up, clarity down, but it came out pretty cool. Used the radial filter to go around the wooden poles and brought up the exposure just a bit on each. Use the adjustment brush to bring up exposure on the rocks off on the right to make them more visible. Used adjustment brush also to create some dark and light areas on the grass to give it more perspective and a less flattened approach. That's in here. You can see how we have these kind of lines in the grass now. That's pretty interesting. Used an adjustment brush to lighten and darken very slightly some of the cloud areas. Crop slightly on the right to get more trees out of the shot. Took the image into Photoshop and used the clone tool to get rid of the two trees in the right distance. Thought they took away from the nice line of the wave. The trees are hard to recognize and can take your eyes away from the picture as a whole. I don't disagree with him there. He didn't think it needed vignetting because it was pretty dark. So pretty cool rendition there. This is Brian Walker. He didn't really write what he did there. Kind of it looks blurry because it's only 320 by 213. So it was so small that when we're viewing it on the screen here, it looks really blurry. This is Laurent Shovin. Let's see. Sorry, I mispronounced your name. Used only Lightroom with basic settings, no presets, just a couple local adjustments. They said that there's another photographer, they like their style, and they use their style. And it looks pretty cool. Rosalie Bischoff. Let's see. Use basic Lightroom edits before sending it off to Silver Effects Pro. Picked a preset, tweaked that preset a little, vignette, and framed it. That's pretty neat. Can hang that right on the wall right now. Oh, here's one that's different. This is from John Deere. Open camera raw, highlights all the way down, shadows all the way up, adjusted white balance. Our W&B sliders to max histogram without clipping. That's the whites and blacks, not the white balance. Added a LUT for vibrance. Added vibrance and clarity. Minor tone curve for contrast. Over sharpen and mask added. Split tone, warm the highlights and cool the shadows, and so on. Some tone adjustments, lens corrections. Then back in Photoshop in the filter gallery, poster edges first, paint daubs, curves added, blues adjustment, copied, enlarge canvas to set side to side, merge, squared, polar coordinate, spin to horizontal, transform and crop, bottom and mask with gradient, mirrored and added direction blur, healing brush for the seam, because when you do all that, you'll get a seam, created frame, added texture, blend mode to lighten and clip to forward, photo fill, and masked out center. So really different rendition. This is from Mark Silverberg. Let's see, they used On One Photo Raw 19.2, dynamic contrast, primarily on the foreground, a sunshine filter, color enhancer for the foreground, added a bit of sky texture and a vignette. Then they brought it over to Adobe Photoshop CS6, added sun rays, partially followed by Pix Imperfect Video, the way they, apparently in that video they do it. Partially he did that. And he went back to Photo Raw, added some selective sharpening and another sunshine filter. This is Dennis Murphy, got a panoramic view, converted the image temporarily to black and white for cropping. I find taking the color out of the image helps me. That's a good tip if you find you have a hard time cropping. Sometimes if you temporarily convert it to black and white, I know of another photographer that does this, it seems to help them better crop the image. Then they will put it back into color when they're done. Although the sky was quite dramatic, I decided to take it out of the equation. Bumped up white balance from 5150 to 5500. 3 graduated filters were used on the sky. The very top one set at -30 exposure. The second just below, the first at -20, and the third at -10. So he did that to give it more general gradation from top to bottom. 7 radial filters were used throughout the image and placed mainly around the edges. 4 brush adjustments were made as well. Selective sharpening applied radial brush to the center of the image only. Pretty cool rendition. Here's another dramatic black and white one from Elias Bristow. He didn't write what he did, but there's that version. Pretty cool. This is from Graham Perkins. Graham didn't write what he did either, but there's Graham's version. This is Arnold De Jong. Used On One Photo Raw 2018. Let's see. Very basic changes to the image. Slight increase in the contrast, added a graduated filter to the sky, lowered exposure and added a bit of color temp to the sky. Used a brush filter to the sunlit area, adding a bit of exposure and adding a bit of warmth. Used a graduated filter on the grass and flipped it upside down. Added some warm color, increased contrast, and added structure to highlight the texture a little bit. Very cool. This is from K Berman. Let's see. Process this in Luminar Flex, which is, she mentioned she just recently downloaded. That is a new product by Skylum, and I will be doing a video on that, hopefully this week on Skylum. So thank you, Karen. That's a very cool rendition. This is from Brian Roseboro. Processed in Luminar 3, cropped it to 16:9, basic edit with the Accent AI filter and the AI Sky Enhancer. Converted to black and white, boosted red and yellow saturation, used a brush mask to desaturate orange roof on the shoreline, used dramatic filter and added the Orton effect, used gradient mask to reduce structure on the clouds, used gradient mask to increase the brightness of the foreground, used a brush mask to reduce the shadows on the poles, and increased the overall image contrast and added a vignette. So pretty cool rendition there. This is from Luis Rivera. Let's see, Luis did Lightroom and then some Photoshop at the end. Did the basic panel adjustments of exposure. Did bring exposure down half a stop. Added some contrast, highlights and shadows at -100 and +100. Got his white and black point. Added a bit of clarity, +10, a little bit of vibrance. Tone curve, medium contrast. And then added sharpening at 70, masking at 50, luminance at 40. Did lens corrections. Then in Photoshop, local adjustments for curves. Then he brought Nik software, processed various images to get different effects in different areas, blended by using layer masks. That's pretty interesting there. And Lightroom, then brought it back into Lightroom and added some vibrance, added the vignette, adjustment brush for dodging and burning in the foreground, and did the export. So there's a pretty cool rendition of the image right there. This is Elena Xyn, processed entirely in Lightroom. Decreased the highlights, increased the shadows, played with whites and blacks and increased the clarity, did a strong contrast in the tone curve, played with the saturation of the blues and luminance of the orange and yellows, put a graduated filter on the grass and a radial filter to enhance the oranges where the sun is, and finally I exposed a little bit, added a little bit of exposure to the rocks and added a vignette. Very cool. This is Rene Deer. First aligned and transformed the image a little bit in Lightroom, then transferred it to Luminar Flex to try to give it a smooth, painterly, and soft look using curves and the Orton effect. And it is very cool. This is Mike Bywater. Let's see. Photoshop. They used Photoshop CC. They duplicated the layer, blend mode, multiply 70% to add drama, so it made the darker parts a little darker. Worked in Adobe Camera Raw, converted to black and white using the black and white 06. I think that is probably the profile. Brush over grass area with a max increase in highlights and clarity to bring out texture. Brush over the wooden post to brighten and added some clarity. Brush path and beach pools, brighten and clarity. Brush brightest sky area to reduce the highlights and darken and added some clarity. And overall crop to concentrate the composition. Pretty cool rendition right there. This is Anuj Jain. Let's see. Did adjustments in the basic panel. I think they meant Lightroom. Used a brush to create the yellow sunlight. Took the picture into Photoshop to remove the middle log. They mentioned that it works better than Lightroom, and I agree 100%. So if you're ever going to remove anything, and instead of using the clone heal brush in Lightroom, definitely Photoshop would work much better. Used a brush to make the white clouds whiter. Finally moved the saturation slider to 100 in the blue primary camera calibration panel. It's a little trick in Lightroom. I've done videos on it. If you go to the camera calibration panel, you'll see there's hue and saturation for red, green, and blue. If you take the saturation slider of the blue and move it all the way to the right, you'll really enhance a landscape in a way that you probably can't predict. And that's pretty cool, Anuj. This is from John Ward. Let's see, did all of it in Lightroom, globally raised the exposure, did lens corrections and straightened the image, tweaked highlights and shadows just a bit, masked the grass, added sharpening, clarity, and lightened the yellows plus saturation, then masked the rocks to the right to lighten and add clarity, then masked the post to lighten, sharpen, and add clarity, then added gradient to the top of the sky to add dehaze, generally tweaked the vibrance and the tone. So pretty cool rendition right there. Alberto Bellini, rather new to photo editing. He says he used Lightroom for the editing and wanted to enhance the cold, dramatic feeling of the image. And you definitely did. Looks pretty cool, Alberto. Nicely done. This is from George McCain. This looks like you could hang it on the wall right away. This is processed in Lightroom. Checked for chromatic aberration and lens corrections. Made the horizon straight. Color temperature to daylight. Increased exposure to get the highlights to the right. So he's looking at the histogram. So he adjusted the exposure just so it was the highlights were all the way to the right. His highlights went to 100, shadows to 43, whites to 14, blacks to 2, clarity to 90, vibrance to 100. On the tone curve, made it medium contrast and adjusted the cloud area in the left up slightly. In the HSL panel, adjusted the reds to 78, orange to 93, yellow to 67, aqua to 31, and blue to 96. In the detail panel, adjusted sharpening to 20 with a radius of 1.1. Luminance noise reduction to 68 and masking to 81. Took the image into Photoshop or adjusted the highlights and shadows using the levels adjustments. Made a black and white adjustment using the luminosity to adjust my colors. Then I did an exposure. Then I did an exposure adjustment for the reflections on the water, the grass, and then the post. Put the frame around the picture, and that's it. Looks pretty cool. This one is Marilyn Stubella. Marilyn, let's see. Bear with me. Sorry for the paper noises as I move things around. Done with On1 Photo Raw 2019. Dynamic contrast, local brushing, vignette, and a color enhancer filter. So this looks blurry too because it's a small image. So remember, when you guys send me your images, make them 2,000 pixels on the long side. Sometimes they'll come out blurry when we show them. This is Alan Butler. Let's see. Said he made a note which is kind of pertinent. He's not knowing what your intention is when I took the photo. That's kind of true, because many times we take an image and we kind of have the idea what we're going for in our mind already, and we'll frame and compose the scene because we know what we're going to do with it. And of course, I didn't tell you anything. I just said process this image. And that's really up for you to kind of come up with anything you'd like, but you have to deal with my composition. So that makes it even harder for you, I understand. For him, the center of interest was the sunset and reflection on the ice and water. My first thought was that the center post was obscuring this area, so he removed that post in Photoshop. He then enhanced the orange in the sunset, and at that point, I felt that the left side was unnecessary and the top of the sky. And because the top of the sky was so spectacular, he thought it was detracting from the sunset, hence the severe crop. That placed the sunset more towards being on a third, then just a little burning into dark in one or two areas that seemed too bright, and that's it. Did a really nice job. And this is from Paul Martin. Paul, in Lightroom, he started with auto tone, and then he adjusted it from there. And a lot of people do that. They'll hit auto just to see what it looks like. Then they'll start moving the sliders to make it fit their image better to their liking. So he did the tone adjustments. After that, the manual tone adjustments. Then he added a graduated filter to the lower portion of the image to add some additional exposure. 0.44 clarity, or 0.44 for the exposure, I'm sorry. Clarity at 12, saturation at 23. Finally, I decided to see if a crop would add more depth and immediacy, and I believe it did. And I think it did in this case. It looks pretty cool. Good. Looks pretty neat. Finally, let's see. This is, we got a couple more to go. This is Akeem Hofbauer. Basic adjustments in Lightroom, cropping, leveling, sharpening, contrast, black and white. Then I opened it in Silver Effects Pro and used a high contrast filter. And then he thinks the most important was cropping using the rule of thirds. So pretty cool. And I think this is our last one for this video. This is from TC Conor. Let's see, he started out in Lightroom Classic CC, did straighten a crop. He applied a profile, which is one of my profiles that I sell, Morganti Landscape Profile. Thank you, TC, for buying those. I appreciate it. Cool and slightly desaturated. Basic tone, exposure, highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks were set using the hold, shift, and double click method. That kind of gives you an auto setting for those specific sliders. And I've covered that in videos. So he gives all the settings he did for the tone and color, vibrance and saturation, that is. And if anyone's interested in those, email me and I'll send them to you. He had the graduated filters. He added a graduated filter. He brought exposure down to -38, clarity up to 17, and saturation up to 36. Sent the photo to Photoshop to add the Orton effect, which action he created. He thought it added a nice minimalistic ethereal effect to the photo, especially the clouds, which TC feels are the main subject of this photo. And noise reduction. Luminance 30, sharpen 60, that was in Lightroom. And the last step, he added a post-crop vignette -12 with feathering at 100%. So that is a pretty cool rendition. So you could see, I think it's kind of interesting. Some people thought like the sunset was the center, or the sun. Because this actually, I got a confession to make. This was at 9 in the morning. And actually, it looks like the sun's in the middle here. The sun was actually way off to my right behind me. It was just the way the clouds were. The sun was reflecting everywhere. So the sun was almost directly behind me. I would say it was about like 30 degrees. If 0 degrees is directly behind me, it was like off to my right about 30 degrees if I'm facing forward. I know that's confusing. So it's over towards the right here. but almost behind me. And that's where the sun was. But it looks like there's a sunrise or sunset right here. So it's kind of interesting. And I think what's kind of cool is some people look at the image and they interpret the most important part being that sun area. Let's call it a sunrise. And some other people think it's the clouds. And some people are really more concerned with the post, and they're moving the post around, taking some out, or cropping it to make the post more central. So there's a lot of things you could do, and I thought it's really interesting how people are interpreting the image. And actually, I think this could help me in the long run. It's going to help me see things a little more differently. I tend to get fixated. So I'll go out and take a picture, and to tell you the truth on this, I was seeing clouds. All I was seeing was clouds. And I'm like composing the image to get as much of the dramatic clouds in as possible. And I maybe didn't compose the image enough so that the posts were properly placed, or the sun or the light was properly placed, and things like that. So I think this is a pretty good exercise for all of us, me included. So as I mentioned at the top, I'm getting caught up. I only received 7 overnight, but we still probably have about 40 that I haven't even done. So either very late today or very early tomorrow, I'll do another video. And as I mentioned, they're kind of petering out, coming in. Then my idea is to just stay on top of this. And then when Sunday comes around, this coming Sunday, I'll do a final video. We'll tie this image up, and I'll introduce a new image for you to do. And then we're changing kind of the rules. What we're going to do then is everyone just send me your image, and I'll make sure my mailbox stays able to accept the images. And I again apologize. I know my mailbox got full and many of the images bounced. So if you got a bounce, you could resend your image. I fixed it, my mailbox. And then what I'll do is I'll just take maybe 20 or so of my favorite images, or ones I think that will help everyone maybe learn something, and we'll go from there. And so again, I thank everyone for watching. I do appreciate it. Remember to check out that support link in the description below this video. I really do appreciate it. And I really do appreciate everyone. Just thank you so much for even just for watching my videos. I do appreciate it.